depending on where you are, kind of determines which lakes you're going to fish. Anchoring and casting and stripping somewhere along the shoals. So basically where you can see a clear drop off. These are great places to find fish. So talking about some styles. So to kind of complement the amazing collection of flies that Aggie has, which is so rad. There's a couple of different styles of stillwater fishing that I've been trying out over the last little bit that seems to be quite productive, depending on the type of lake or stillwater that you're going to be approaching. Keeping in mind that obviously, depending on where you are, kind of determines which lakes you're going to fish. And then, you certainly get your favorites, or you get lakes that you kind of get to know really well. Depending on the lake determines sort of the style of fishing that I'd like to choose for the day. Also, who's your fishing partner? So I will say for a fact that I've just recently gotten my dad back into chronomid indicator fishing, because like Aggie kind of hinted at, and I totally agree with it, it's very hard to sit in a boat all day watching a bobber, like without getting almost like that river eye, like when you've been watching an object that's been moving in water for an extremely long time, but not going down, especially if the wind starts to pick up. So it's extremely hard sometimes to be just sitting in the boat and waiting and watching for something to drop. Some people really prefer that because it's relaxing. Obviously, there's bevies and snacks. If your target is just to have a good day out on the water with the boat and you don't really, you're not really caring about productivity, then by all means, like throw a line out and see what happens. However, the indicator fishing has only become more productive for myself and my dad fishing together, primarily because we're utilizing more tools with the boat in terms of understanding our depths better, choosing better depths from line. So understanding fish behavior is a really big part of indicator fishing. You get to a lake and you don't know its depth, or you don't even have a map to work with. It can get kind of hard to kind of figure out where you want to fish at what depth. So as a practice, I do like to use depth indicators, whether it's just like a little fishing buddy. You don't need a super fancy fish finder. I actually bought one for my Watermaster raft, a little quick one that you can throw out to the water and kind of see what's around. It was like $40 off of Amazon. Just this little, it literally looks like a Fisher Price toy. I know I'm dating myself by using Fisher Price in my coin here, but I will say that it literally looks like a Fisher Price phone. You're going to throw it out, and it actually just helps for me to kind of figure out depth if I'm in a lake that I don't know. So indicator fishing, they're usually anchored up and figuring out what the depth is. So let's say the fish are sitting at 15 feet. You normally want to dangle a chronomid of choice, usually about a foot or two above their heads, to see whether or not they're going to come and take. I agree with Aggie in the sense that, like, throw out an indicator or a bobber, and if something doesn't come calling within 5 to 10 minutes, you better switch it up or change the tactic or change the style of fishing that you're going to choose or approach. Because otherwise you're just either going to get bored, or if you're there for productivity and you really want to catch some fish, then that might not be your best way. However, some other people on the other spectrum of indicator fishing will tell you that it's worth the wait. Certainly if you're doing deep water chronomid fishing, which is kind of like a beast in itself, that's usually when we're dropping line even up to 90 feet down. These are in big glacial lakes. I don't tend to do a lot of deep water chronomid fishing for the fact that there's just so much line and there's so much that can go wrong. So I'm definitely someone who kind of like waits it out. I'm a cast and strip girl, so let's talk about that. Anchoring and casting and stripping is great, especially when you're driving around on your boat and you can notice that there's some fish activity or you see hatch and you're like, okay, let's stop here and see what happens. I do find too that if you're new to a lake, anchoring and casting and stripping somewhere along the shoals, so basically where you can see a clear drop off from where, for lack of better words, if you see the lake and you see that there's a color change, so it goes light to suddenly dark, that line is kind of where you'd like to try and fish, because normally fish like to kind of school up and hang out in these little areas right at the drop-offs because they're really nutrient rich. So these are great places to find fish if you don't have a fish finder, but you can at least like visually confirm, or sometimes you can even see fish rising and you think, okay, there's activity. I'm going to go park over there and see if I can cast and strip some of the go-to flies. Dead drift cast and strip I usually use when we don't have as much wind, which we all know in still water, sometimes wind is not your friend. But sometimes it can really work to your advantage if you don't want to anchor or don't have anchors, and you would like to simply work your way using the wind to slowly drift all the way across a lake and just cast and strip. And it's almost like a lotto style. Like you kind of want to see what's out there subsurface within 2 to 3 feet of water. If you're going to dead drift and cast and strip, depending on the lake, I normally actually use a sink line for that type of activity because my sink line's not going to drop fast enough for me to not retrieve it within the 2 to 5 feet strike zone. And it's been pretty successful. Like there's been a lot of surprises, which makes the fish really fun. Like that part of fishing is, it's sort of like surprise, but I love that kind of stuff. And it's definitely one of those things where if you're fishing with somebody else in the boat and they've decided that they want to change their fly, like my dad who changes his flies like a bazillion times. Yes, this is being recorded and he's probably going to see this later and be like, you talked about me like that. But I will say, like, I'm sort of like a one and done. Like I will choose a surefire like type of fly to see what's out there for the whole lake first before I then choose to switch up. And I know a lot of people like to switch within 5 to 10 minutes if there's no activity. Neither way is wrong. All I can say is that if someone else is switching up while you're in the boat, rather than waiting for them, cast and strip. You're not going to catch fish unless there's a line out in the water. So that's always my biggest thing. And you never know what's around because fish obviously move around a lot. The last one on there is the trolling. This one's super relaxing. Not going to lie, trolling, big fan, especially with sinking line, depending on where you are in the lake, but also probably the most relaxing when you want to like be also having like a nice drink or you're distracted with snacks. That's usually when the line hits, just when you're trying to pass someone a snack. So always pretend like you're distracted and the trout will come, I promise you. But definitely trolling, I would find, is definitely really way more productive when temperatures tend to go up a little bit in lakes, because you will find that fish are going to naturally move closer to the bottom of a lake to cool down, but also to, that's just their protective way of doing things. We'll